Basements. For buyers who are looking in an area where there's basements in houses, there is nothing more frightening for a buyer. If you live in an area of the country where there are basements in houses, I will tell you that there is nothing more terrifying to a buyer than getting stuck with a house with a bad basement. Water leaks, foundation problems, all kinds of things can go wrong in a basement, and they're scary. We don't know exactly how to fix them. They seem very expensive, and if something goes wrong, it seems like all of your stuff can be destroyed overnight. I've worked with a ton of buyers. I know that they are very concerned about what goes on in a basement. I've seen lots of different kinds of basements. I've seen old, 1890s brick cellars, and I've seen some beautifully finished basements just from the past few years. Buyers are still always concerned about the basements. So if you're looking to buy a home, you live in an area with basements, and you're freaked out, I have the top 5 signs of water in the basement. The number 1 sign of water in the basement, past or current, is a basement smell. Basement smell is kind of one of those smells that we just know, like garage smell or outside smell. It's just one of those smells that always kind of just comes up smelling like basement. A lot of times that smells honestly kind of completely normal. Basements are enclosed, particularly in older homes, they don't have a lot of good ventilation. They're just kind of humid, kind of damp areas. Doesn't necessarily mean there's problems, but when you come across a basement that has a smell, that's certainly a sign that there might be water in the basement. One other sure smell in a basement that smells like mold, there's been a water problem, is if you go into the basement and it smells like cat urine. If you're upstairs in the house and there's cat toys and there's possibly a cat wandering around, cat urine isn't really a great smell. Obviously, you probably want to talk to the seller about some kind of cleaning. But if there doesn't seem to be any cats and the rest of the house smells okay and you go into the basement and it smells like cat urine, that's a pretty good sign that you have a pretty bad mold problem down there. There are a few specific kinds of mold caused by those damp conditions that smell almost exactly like cat urine. So if you smell it in the basement, not the rest of the house, and there's no cat standing around, probably something you're going to want to talk to your home inspector or to your agent about to get that checked out. So one of the things I talk to my buyers about when we're looking at a house when we approach the basement is what kind of stuff is in the basement. Whether it's an unfinished basement or a finished basement, in general, most basements have some kind of stuff in it. If it's finished basement, couches, chairs, TVs, a bar, stuff like that. Unfinished, usually you're going to see some kind of storage down there. Cardboard boxes, plastic bins, the whole thing. What you're looking for in terms of this stuff is 2 things. The first one is, what kind of stuff is down there? If they have, like I said, a finished basement, nice carpet, good couches and stuff, probably the basement doesn't really see any water. Not a lot of people are going to put, thousands of dollars of their basement stuff at risk if there's periodic flooding issues in the basement. So if you see a lot of just nice stuff and nice living space down there, it's a pretty good sign that the house doesn't have a water problem. The second thing is look at the condition of the stuff. And this one applies obviously mostly in an unfinished basement. They have all their stuff on the floor. Or is it on the floor? Do they have it all raised up a little bit, maybe on a couple 2x4s to make sure it's not touching the bottom for some reason? Maybe they have a bunch of plastic on the concrete that they've put their stuff on top of. Why would they have that? Why would they use plastic as opposed to, a carpet or literally nothing? Not that you should ever disturb anybody's stuff during a showing, but in the basement, if you see something like that, they have plastic bins there, kind of maybe pull it over to the side a few inches so you can see underneath it to see if there's, that distinctive water plastic bin mark that always ends up in your shed. And if they have cardboard boxes that they've stored all their stuff in, absolutely look at the cardboard boxes. You don't even have to move them. Because if that basement's getting water, you're going to see all kinds of little watermarks on the side of those cardboard boxes. The other interesting thing I've seen in a couple basements around here when I've done showings is there's furniture in the basement. It's not finished, it's concrete, but they've painted the walls and everything like that. But all of the furniture down there is like plastic patio furniture. Like, I'm not going to judge anybody's, choices for how they furnish their basement. But if everything down there is some kind of plastic or other waterproof kind of thing, maybe poke around a little more. Is the reason that they're using plastic patio furniture in the basement because they didn't have any other furniture? Or is it because it's the kind of furniture that can get wet on a regular basis and it doesn't really make any difference? Number 3, look at the basement itself. This can be a little trickier in finished basements, but even in finished basements, you can usually find some spaces that aren't completely finished. So you can see the studs in the walls, so you can see the block on the wall, so you can see the unfinished concrete. What are we looking for? Weird stuff, which I'll call cracks, and we'll call them spots. I don't want to address any foundation problems and structural problems for a house that you can see in a basement because I'm not really an expert in that, but I can tell you that cracks in the foundation are usually caused by water. The reason why is because for whatever reason, maybe the house is, at the bottom of a slope, or maybe grading against the house is eroded. You have all this water, all the rain or whatever it is from outside pushing on those basement walls, and over time, they crack a little bit. There's a lot of pressure. Water's very heavy. So when you have unfinished basement walls, check them out to see if you can see different kinds of cracks. Again, this doesn't always mean that there's a water problem, but if there's a weird smell or it's all patio furniture, that's another indication that there might be a water problem. For example, look at the corners of the basement. Usually, particularly in a black basement where those corners come together, for whatever reason, water always seems to flow differently into these corners, and that's the most likely place that you're going to see some water invasion right there. You're looking for maybe a rusty color on the basement walls, certainly black mold looking substances, everything like that. If it's an unfinished basement where they've painted the block and there's all kinds of little patches of places where the paint is peeling off, kind of if you poke at it, it's hard and kind of cracks off. One of the reasons why that paint is peeling is because the block behind it is moist. Not necessarily that it's flooding, but that there's some moisture in that block. It's absorbed from the ground, and that makes the paint unable to stick, and it just kind of bubbles out and peels off a little bit. Another place to check in that unfinished basement, or the unfinished parts of a finished basement, is the concrete floor. You will see, if water has pooled, just like anywhere else, you'll see a little white outline or a little maybe a rust-colored outline or something like that. Same thing if they've painted the basement floor and parts of it looks like it's kind of bubbling and peeling up. That's usually a sign that the concrete behind it has absorbed some kind of water for some reason, and it's something that needs to be checked out in the future. Number 4 is the big one that people are usually worried about in a basement when there's not active water flowing into it, and that is mold. Looking for mold in a basement? What you're going to look for? You're looking for colors. You're looking for blue, you're looking for black, you're looking for orange, you're looking for white. Colors that don't quite match whatever it's attached to. Rarely do people paint things in a mold pattern, so if you start to see some weird random colorations on things, again, please get it checked out. The big one is black mold. Now, black mold is a whole separate specific thing that can cause all kinds of respiratory issues. Again, I am not an expert, so I won't speak to that. But if there's black, powdery, spotted kind of things anywhere in the basement, it might very well be mold. That's absolutely something that you want to get an inspector to check out. Another place to look for mold signs, look up. Look at the joists in the ceiling. Look at the metal venting. Is there watermarks on it? Are there, looks like little old dried droplets on the bottom of that venting where maybe it gets real humid in there and then it condenses on the face of that vent. Wood absolutely absorbs water. You might even see visible mold on a 2x4 in a basement, kind of like, when you go hiking in the woods and there's an old tree that fell down and there's that weird, stacked looking mold on the side of the tree. You can absolutely see that in basements. If it's there, that means there's some kind of water problem in the basement. Absolutely get an expert opinion. If you look up, you can usually see a lot of interesting things about the humidity, the dampness, and possible water intrusion into the basement. One other thing that you can see in a basement that sometimes can be easy to overlook, particularly if the basement is painted white, it's called efflorescence. What it is, you have concrete, you have a block wall, and water has sunk into it, and then it's dried. And when it dries, it leaves behind kind of like white powdery, almost like sparkly little bits of something. If you see something like that, it means that, if nothing else, the block in that basement is absorbing water in some capacity, whether it's constant, whether it's a problem, anything like that. A home inspector can help you determine whether or not it's a problem, or a basement specialist. You could always call them as well. But it is a sign, again, not necessarily of a horrific flood that's going to ruin everything, but of a foundation that's been damp in the past, maybe damp in the future, and it is something you probably want to consider. And number 5, take a look around. Look at all the stuff. Almost everything that comes in contact with water, usually it leaves some kind of evidence that water was there. Wood, fabrics, carpeting, the ceiling joists, the vent work, the electrical. Take a look around and see if you see any signs of any prior flooding or current water problem. The first big place to check is the bottom of a 2x4. The sill plate, the piece of 2x4 wood that touches the ground, that is one of the best places to look to see if there's been any water problems in the past. In a finished basement, maybe try a closet under the stairs to see if there's the exposed structure there, or in a utility room behind the furnace, something like that. If there has been water in the basement that is extreme enough to be a real problem, you will see on the bottom of that 2x4 some kind of water line, some kind of discoloration, some kind of something. In a house, wood stays fairly uniform over the years, doesn't change colors. Maybe as it gets older, it gets a little darker or something, but it's not like all of a sudden it gets weird brown spots on it. So if you see a sill plate, that bottom 2x4 in a house, just look at it. Make sure there's nothing weird on there. Same thing for paneling and drywall. Paneling and drywall in a basement, really anywhere, if it gets wet, it kind of absorbs that water into it because it's not a solid structure. So if water has gotten in there in the past, you're going to see, again, kind of a water line, kind of a something, maybe a mushy spot on the drywall or paneling, or where the finish on it has kind of peeled back or something. If you're seeing signs like that, it sounds like maybe they had water in the basement at one point. Pro tip, if you're looking at a house and you go into the basement and the basement used to be finished, but now there's no carpeting and all the drywall is cut off at a straight line at about, 3.5 feet high, that basement got flooded. There is no rational reason why anybody would just cut off most of their drywall and leave it exposed like that. So if you see that, it's flooded at some point. Maybe it's sump pump. Maybe it's all fixed. Maybe it's perfect. Maybe they, sprayed to seal everything off. Awesome. But if you see that in a basement, it means it's flooded and you need to ask some questions. If there's been water in the basement, again, you can usually tell because, you've seen it before. You had an old towel that you left on the deck or something like that. It absorbs water and then it dries, but there's still like a watermark on it. Like you can still tell that, whoops, I left this out in my car when it rained and now it's ruined, i.e. car seats. So for any fabrics down there, take a quick look. Carpet, back of the couch, whatever it is. You know what water stains look like. We've all dumped a glass of water on our shirt, and then you have that nice little distinctive thing on your shirt. It looks fantastic. Looks like the same thing down in a basement when there's been basement water. Maybe the owner spilled a glass of water on the back of their couch, which is cool, and it happens to everybody. But how often does an owner spill a glass of water on the back of a couch with a wavy line all across the back of the couch? Seems weird, so keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. If you see something like that, again, ask your home inspector, ask the seller, see what's going on, because that's kind of an interesting sign of basement water. So, if you use those tips and found some kind of signs of some kind of water in some kind of basement in a house you've been looking at, what do you do about it? The first thing you want to do is contact the seller's agent and ask, hey, I found this weird mold thing on the beam. What's that all about? What's going on? Was there ever water in the basement? In most states, I think 100% of states, sellers have to fill out property disclosures. And one of the questions on there is always, are there water problems in the basement? If it's answered no, and there's still this thing, there could be a reasonable explanation. It could absolutely be that they had a water problem 35 years ago and they fixed it and they've never had any water since. Cool. Don't be afraid of that. That sounds like a great house, assuming everything else works out. They might say, every once in a while we get seepage in that corner when there's like a really heavy rain, but we talked to a guy and it's no big deal and it's going to cost $87,000 to fix. Whatever. Take that information, talk to your home inspector about it, talk to your agent about it and see if it is something that, is no big deal, or if it's a space you want to finish and make fancy, maybe it's kind of a big deal and it has to be fixed. Other things may have happened. Maybe there's a watermark all in the utility room and it's obvious, and it was from a sump pump failure. So they've replaced the sump pump, there's a battery backup. There's these more cosmetic kinds of things where you would have to replace some drywall or just repaint or something like that. Again, not a big issue, but if the seller has an answer to that question, and obviously it seems reasonable, I would go for it. It is very rare in my experience to have a seller that just lies about everything all the time. So I find it unusual, particularly with something that has visible evidence of water seepage, that a seller would be like, what are you talking about? No, it's totally fine. If you're looking at the house, you like the house, you're not sure about this weird watermark on the back of the couch or whatever it is, talk to your home inspector. You absolutely can work with your home inspector prior to the inspection. Give them a call, send them an email and say, hey, I love this house, it looks cool, but in the basement, I saw in the corner, there's this like white powdery stuff, and I can't tell if that means that it's wet or if it's just part of the paint or what exactly is going on there. Let me know. Home inspectors work for you. If you have questions about it, make sure they answer those questions and make sure they answer those questions in a way that you can understand. Thank you for joining me for my basement special. I like to help buyers with questions like this, particularly big things that seem, kind of scary and complicated, stuff like that. If you have any questions about basement water, if you have any questions about buying or selling a house, pretty much anywhere in the United States, I'm always happy to help you. Give me a call, text me anytime, 219-765-2062. You can also email email me if it's easier, hsbyerica@gmail.com. Thank you for joining me for this buyer tips. I post these once a week, so please like and subscribe to my channel. And if you ring the bell, you'll get notified every time I post one of these videos. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys soon.